Hello everybody, and welcome to this next video recording in the RICS Tech Partner Program series. My name is Andrew Knight and I sit within the part of our RICS that looks at standards, regulation, qualification standards and thought leadership. And my role is to look at the impact of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. With over 130,000 members working worldwide, right across the property cycle, working in land, residential, commercial infrastructure. It's a hugely wide area of practice that our members are involved in, and thus the impact of technology can be profound and hopefully very positive. And I'm really glad today to have Nic from Absolar joining me, and I'm sure we'll be talking about a lot of the issues that are very much in the fore around ESG. So welcome, Nic.
Hi, Andrew. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. And I always like to start these sessions with a bit of, not so much the bits and bytes, but a bit of a kind of the human side of things. So it'd be great to hear about your particular backstory and background and the team around you and a bit of the origin story of Absolar itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Well, I'm an accountant by trade. I spent my early career in corporate finance and audit, and then moved into real estate and property management about 10 years ago now, and dived headfirst into the world of leases, rent reviews, and planning law. And bizarrely, I fell in love with it. You know, it's enjoyable stuff, particularly coming from accountancy. Whilst completing an MBA, I met Dr. Phil Wu, who's one of our co-founders, an engineer who's an expert in citywide energy modelling. I met him in the campus coffee shop actually, and we quickly realised that actually we were at a tipping point in terms of availability of data and the requirement to hit net zero. That actually there's an opportunity to approach the problem with that kind of scaled approach, looking at our cities rather than what's typically been done, sort of looking property by property. So we realised actually having that scale approach that property management brings might just change some of that energy efficiency discussion. We then brought in a technical co-founder, Chris, into what we were fast terming Absolar, and he brought the ability to sort of iterate models overnight, build software, start to bring AI in, so that actually we could do a lot of that scale work using machinery, using technology, and that was the start of our operations really. We are all driven by a desire to present pathways to make more effective decision making in net zero. The drive is out there, the demand for change is out there, but quite often those pathways aren't present.
So what's the nuts and bolts of the actual tasks that your platform and solution does, and what kind of technology are you able to use to achieve that?
Yeah, so we fundamentally exist to find solar potential. That's kind of the tagline we've tried to give it to simplify it. Obviously that means a lot greater things. We use remote survey techniques, which we can touch on a bit, I'm sure, around using AI and computer vision to look at buildings, using all those data points we can gather from ordnance survey, from satellite mapping, from 3D mapping, so that we can begin to understand what a building is like in reality. And actually the main bulk of the technology looks at solar potential. So looking, where can I put solar panels? How much energy will that create? How much will it cost? And how much will I save?
And I suppose one of the challenges is the kind of mix of data sources that you need to be able to use and utilize there. So what's kind of, when I say off the shelf, you've talked about various sources already, but what can you get from other sources, and what are you having to self-generate in terms of the activities that you do at Absolar?
Yeah, so we're really lucky in the UK. There is a wealth of information and data out there. So we use a lot of information from Ordnance Survey. You know, we're in a bizarrely lucky place where actually they map out every shed within the country, you know, down to that level of detail, so we can get a real good understanding of that kind of geospatial positioning of buildings. A lot of our technology will use LiDAR, and for those that don't know what LiDAR is, imagine a form of radar hung underneath a plane, pinging out certain points to build a 3D model. So we're able to use this LiDAR information to pick up how high every part of the building is and build a 3D model, essentially of an entire city. We then have vast sort of open data sets such as energy performance certificates, and there's a lot of open source data, particularly things like OpenStreetMap, that actually are very useful where the community are feeding data in. Our self-generated data comes from those solar radiation models, and that's years of Phil's time really that is devising these models that can look at a rooftop and pick up exactly how much radiation hits it at every 30-minute interval.
So you're excuse me, you obviously talked about this being a challenge of scale. I mean, both in terms of what it represents for the UK and other jurisdictions in terms of this kind of ability to green up, particularly the residential sector. Who are you working with at scale to try and achieve this?
Really, local authorities have been a key customer to date. They absolutely have the drive. I think crucially they have the budget. Central government in the UK has been really good at actually setting aside vast amounts of sums to sort out, really fuel poverty, and therefore local authorities take the charge on that. So they've been the main customer in two ways really. One, they've wanted to understand the layout of their towns, cities, conurbations to get a feel for what the energy performance is now and what it could become, with a mix of interventions. So we also pick up which ones need insulation, heat improvements. So we're able to kind of inform those big policy decisions, as well as push a lot of information through to the public. So a number of local authorities have taken that data, using some of our software, presented it to the public, where actually any resident can tap in their postcode and see what needs to happen to their building to make it more energy efficient. And we very much view solar as the pinnacle. That is where you aim to get to. You've got to do the insulation first. You've got to fix any faulty equipment first, and then move for solar as that pinnacle.
So if you're seeing, as you said,
so that's kind of authorities that have, so kind of local authorities that have driven the residential sector.
You've frozen there slightly, Nick. Are you back with us?
Yeah.
I just lost you there.
Yeah, we lost. We had a little bit of.
Yes, where did I get to? Sorry, do you want me to start?
Yeah.
I think you'd, excuse me, you were talking about local authorities, obviously generally. It's probably worth, I think you'd used the phrase that solar was the pinnacle, and then started talking about fabric and other kind of remedial pieces. So perhaps if you want to sort of start again talking about how solar is the pinnacle, and then talk about the other things that can underpin that, and then carry on with your conversation about what you're about to say with local authorities.
Yeah, absolutely. So we very much view solar as the pinnacle that you should be aiming for in terms of residential property. There's lots for you to do first, primarily around insulation and fixing the heating system within a building, be it a new boiler or into air source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps. And so the technology actually will start to look at building fabric and advise where things should be done first. So we're very pragmatic in that approach, and we'll say here's a step for you to take. Local authorities are obviously particularly interested in that to devise their net zero plan. So at a policy level, to work out what needs to go where to effectively create that residential net zero portfolio. A secondary use for the technology that local authorities have found is pushing that information into the public domain. So using some of our software, you can tap in your postcode and it will tell you, here's the energy status of your property, here's what needs to be done, and if solar is appropriate, here is the solar information necessary, linking you through with the local market with approved installers, so you can actually have impact on the ground. In addition to local authorities, the commercial sector has been quite strong, stronger than we thought it would be during a pandemic, that's for sure. We've had the Royal Air Force. We've surveyed a number of their airfields, looking at ground mount, rooftop and carport solar, where they're looking to understand what is their potential and how could they begin to offset some of their operational carbon emissions. And then further down in the commercial market, commercial property portfolios have been particularly keen to use the technology to identify the easy wins, to find where are the properties where actually it's a no-brainer to put solar on, so that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If they can tackle those early wins first, then they get the investors on board, they get the finance flowing. So we've been helping spot those early wins, and actually we're delivering some of them ourselves by putting panels on roofs, which fundamentally is our goal.
So I mean, in that sense, if we were looking for the next big large stride that will drive energy efficiency, is it these kind of real cliched phrase low-hanging fruit, but it is almost getting a flywheel effect where actually identify opportunities, get some cost savings seen very, very quickly, and generate that kind of momentum? Or are there other things that we should be looking at as well?
So certainly from our kind of research and our perspective, yes, it's these early wins, and we see that in the commercial sector. The residential housing stock is actually, we feel, quite well served. There is considerable funding available in that kind of fuel poverty market, in that where they're not able to pay. There is a lot of funding available, and it is beginning to make a real headway. The Green Home Grants wasn't particularly successful from a private point of view, but for social housing, for fuel poverty, it's been really successful in deploying money to where it's needed. The mortgage markets within residential property are also acting as a carrot and a stick. You're beginning to see mortgage rates for greener properties coming through at a discount, or penalties for those that are not able to meet the requirements. And people, banks such as NatWest are able to lend money to make improvements to properties. So there's kind of the mortgage market for that able to pay market seems to be picking up. Private rental sector is being pushed with minimum energy standards. So residential property does look as if actually there'll be a significant change over the next years without much intervention. It really is that commercial property where the real large strides can be made. The industrial sheds throughout the UK that are essentially mini power plants, that have structural issues, that have issues such as leases, that are locking out any investment being made, that have the kind of the pension fund investors that decision-making process is quite long. Solving some of those problems will make giant strides within a citywide energy model.
Indeed. And in terms of kind of supply chain and all other professionals, what are the kind of people and processes and resource that we need to actually take advantage of this? Because on the one hand, we can identify the opportunities, but then we need a whole bunch of professionals of various practice areas to actually make this happen. What's your view on what that landscape looks like?
I think I'm not going to give the corny answer and say it's everyone that needs to pull together. We know that. I think particularly the professional services, such as surveyors, have a huge role to play to normalise the discussion around energy efficiency, and I think I'm talking particularly around commercial property, but also in the residential sector. I think there's a bit of a tick box approach we see at the moment when it comes to has a certificate been lodged, rather than, well, what does that mean, what can be done? In residential property, I think there's lots of it. There's lots of time points when impacts can be made. With commercial property, actually it's the point of transaction or the point of a lease variation where such big changes to a building can occur. So if it can be factored into a surveyor's workflow to actually consider energy efficiency or the energy potential of a building, I think we'll see a lot greater transition, a lot speedier transition than if it locks it out for another 10 years because of lease terms. And that's by far the biggest complication to rolling out commercial solar and commercial property improvements that we see on a day-to-day basis.
So do you think there's still a lack of awareness and these skills gaps in that piece? Because clearly, from that point of view, looking at lease and property management, this hasn't been a normal thing to consider. So there's clearly, or I would imagine, an issue here where we've got to really raise people's awareness of this and make them think, as you say, there are particular points where this should be, front of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. We're very good at a nation of pointing out if a property's at risk of flooding. I always use that as an example. We're good at carrying out those flooding assessments or looking at actually You know, is there a right of a church to demand some money to repair the church roof? It just needs to be that level of actually, let's look at the energy performance and the potential improvements that can be made and factor that into the transaction. Fundamentally, and done well, energy efficiency will save clients money. So it is something that is beneficial to the parties involved. So I think if it can be standardized as a here are the types of information that, or where we can go to get that information, and then what we can do with it and present it to a client, it will make that conversation a lot easier. At the moment, you're at the risk of having to, you know, if you want to know anything about your building, you have to go and get quotes and get engineers involved, and that's obviously too labour intensive to factor into a workflow.
And on that basis, do you think there's still a lack of available data? Because clearly, as you say, if there's a kind of a piece of inertia here that says, oh, actually, well, we don't know enough about the potential, we can't really judge the business case, do you think data will be available in sufficient quality and efficacy that people can have these discussions perhaps more quickly without having to spend time and money almost justifying the business case?
There certainly isn't the data at the moment. You know, the best we've got thinking on the residential sector is energy performance certificates. And we know they're flawed, and we know there are things that are happening to change them. They're often misunderstood. It's got an energy performance rating has nothing to do with the carbon emissions of a property. It is all around the cost of each kilowatt hour consumed. So there's certainly improvements that can be made to the quality of data that's required. In terms of what is coming through, there are huge changes in what data you're able to grab quite quickly from databases. There is a big drive at the moment by the government in heat pumps, you know, quite rightly so. And a lot of that drive is around the digitization of data, and actually how can we make it plausible to survey a property. Can you have an air source heat pump and answer that question remotely rather than having engineers in the property? So I think that there are strides being made. Remains to be seen if that's adopted by the surveyor community, I guess, as a source of information. And
do you see any new technologies on the horizon that might be a veritable silver bullet, as it were, in terms of some of these challenges? I mean, I don't know whether, for instance, hydrogen boilers or electric boilers, do you see any kind of either fabric or those kind of things that are going to, you know, have once again a significant effect?
We don't actually. I don't think that's a bad thing, but I don't think there isn't this kind of this silver bullet, this golden cure that's going to come along. I think it is very much about taking the right mixture of interventions and approaches. Batteries will certainly be interesting in years to come, but at the moment they don't have the life cycle. They don't have the ability to shift enough power that makes them economically viable for anything larger than a residential installation, really. So I think batteries need a lot of investment before that becomes something worthwhile. Hydrogen is a long way off, albeit there are investments being made. And as heat pumps, certainly again, residential, small commercial sector, heat pumps are fantastic for new builds and sort of wider scale retrofits. I think there's a growing worry within some parts of the industry that actually adopting them for every property isn't right. Like we said, solar is the pinnacle. I think heat pump we'd very much view as one of those pinnacles as well, but you've got to have a step plan to get to it. You can't just go to a property and install an air source heat pump. You actually end up causing the end user potential economic pain by doing so.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly vaguely looked at it. I live in an Edwardian property, and I'm probably guessing that my fabric and, you know, the infrastructure of my building probably doesn't lend itself to heat pumps, because it probably would be too challenging a property for that kind of technology without additional pieces as well. So, as you say, it's not quite that simple, is it, for a huge proportion of the housing stock?
Yeah, exactly. It's having this combination of approaches is going to be the answer. Very rarely is there one thing you can do to a property to solve the problem. It is a mixture of interventions, and I think that's why to have that professional services involved at the point of a decision making process, such as a transaction or a lease transfer, is so important to provide that pathway, to provide options at the very least, so it can be costed in to those decision makers.
Indeed. So for Absolar, what does your roadmap look like? Well, what areas are you going to be focusing on in the sort of short, medium, and long term, do you think?
Certainly short term, we're continuing our expansion across local authorities. So we've covered 26 to date. So we're moving across the UK and Wales, England and Wales, and into Scotland. So we are gaining coverage of all the properties in the country as our aim. In the medium term, delivering on that potential is actually one of our key goals. So we're already doing it in the commercial market. We will hang our hat on the numbers we produce and actually deliver a solar installation to that potential. So I think we're looking to do more and more of that. It's one thing to help people find their potential, it's another to actually get them to realise their potential. We're all keen on delivering that impact, and that is our goal. So medium term, we'll actually be focusing on delivery and looking at some of those innovative business models that can help fund that delivery to make progress happen quicker.
Indeed. Well, it's I commend you on all your efforts. It's obviously a incredibly important area, and I know something that we're very much focusing on around that kind of upskilling, awareness raising to make sure that our profession plays the key role that it should do. But for the moment, it's been great to chat, Nic, and I look forward to catching up later in the year and see how things are going.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you.